All right, so Lincoln does a style. Debate opens with the affirmative construction. You get 6 minutes. Both teams will have 5 minutes of planning time that you can use whenever you see fit. Obviously, just like in public forum, you do not have to use all or any of your planning time. While somebody else is using their planning time, you should obviously be taking advantage of that time as well. Ready?
All right. So, Sony is the most successful gaming division out there, and I'll tell you why. Sony's gaming industry was the most high-powered console, is the most high-powered console in the world. After being stabbed in the back from Nintendo, which PlayStation and Nintendo were supposed to make a new console together back in 1993, Nintendo switched up instead mid-development and left Sony in the dark. But this didn't stop Sony. In 1994, the first PlayStation was released for $299. The PS1 was among the first wave of consoles capable of delivering 3D visuals, while also being arguably the first CD-based console to gain widespread global popularity. This differed from its arch rivals offering the Nintendo 64, which was still used cartridges. CDs had much slower loading times than cartridges, but offered 700 megabytes of data compared to the maximum of 64 megabytes of storage seen on a later N64 games. This helped with so many things such as better game graphics that would need more storage space, but also the amount of power that would still need to run by because of their new form of disc games. This is the beginning of how Sony starts to outcompete everyone in the gaming industry. My contention is how Sony is more successful than Microsoft or Nintendo. It's through a pure drive and the mindset, even through hard times. 6 years later, Sony released the PS2, which had managed to eclipse the original console in nearly every way. Released in 2000, Sony embraced the multimedia experience by offering support for DVDs. This was a big deal because the PS2 actually became one of the cheaper DVD players on the market at the time. At this time, Nintendo and Microsoft were outracing Sony by coming up with new ideas for games and even consoles, with the first Xbox and the GameCube. In 2004, Sony came out with the best handheld console of all time, the PSP. This took all game players by surprise. This system was the most powerful portable console when it was introduced and was the first real competitor of Nintendo's handheld consoles after many challengers such as Nokia's N-Gage had failed. The PSP advanced graphics compatibilities made it a popular mobile entertainment device, which could connect to a PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3, and any computer with a USB interface, other PSP systems, and the internet. This sold for $249. Even though it was much more expensive than it was way better than any PlayStation console. Throughout the years, Sony added better cooling fans, which made better memory storage, more comfortable controllers, and sleeker looks to their consoles. They even started adding home screens. Better games came out, including God of War, The Last of Us, Days Gone, all the Spider-Man games, and even GTA was first developed by Sony. Sony has overcome so many challenges, and with their new release, the PS5, they have an accessibility for VR.
Planning time? Yeah. How much planning time?
I'll do the 5 minutes.
You want to do the full 5 minutes now?
Yeah, it's like 8K. Like it needs to be 8K. Maybe you could spend like 300 too. Just spend like
5 minutes of planning time.
spend like 300 on race a couple $100. I just see that.
3 minutes left in planning time. Two minutes remain in planning time. One minute remains in planning time. Thirty seconds. Fifteen seconds. Time.
Let's see what you got.
All right, ready to cross the affirmative?
Yes.
3 minutes on the clock. Begin.
Alright. My opponent stated about Nintendo switching up on Sony, but that wasn't the reason. Nintendo actually saved Sony. According to History Computer articles, Nintendo signed a deal that allows Sony to produce the CD-ROM for dominant console. What good things Sony have done for Nintendo? The PS2 was still beating in sales than Nintendo, so they weren't technically outraising in sales. When Nintendo came with the big boom after the PS2 was released, the Nintendo DS was selling 1.4 million. Nintendo Switch was selling 122.5 million. Game Boy, the regular Nintendo was selling 118.69 million. According to Times of India, its latest earnings calling, Nintendo announced that it sold 8.23 million Switches consoles in the last quarter, taking the lifetime sales of 122.55 million units. This figures beats the 1.17.2 million PS4 consoles that Sony sold as per the latest data shared by the company.
Good. Anybody need planning time? All right, are you ready for your argument? Okay. You got 7 minutes on the clock.
Okay.
Begin.
One of the biggest two rivals is Sony PlayStation, that has been around the video gaming world almost as long as Nintendo and continues to compete for world dominance. But regardless of what Sony can do for you, it will never be able to defeat the company that saved gaming industry for many years ago. I will be delivering my contention by stating that Microsoft and Nintendo gaming systems have a powerful effect on the gaming community more than Sony's gaming. According to riches.com, any third-party developer had to be licensed to create games for Nintendo excessively, which means that they could not develop games for any other company and limited them to only 2 per year. When PlayStation Portal launched in North America in 2005, it was being sold for $249, which is about 100 more than the Nintendo DS. The large price tag for the portable device did not seem to matter when it launched, and Sony claimed it sold 500,000 units in the first 2 days. Those numbers were probably due to many PlayStation gamers that were ready for a portable device and were willing to pay whatever they sold it for, because within a couple months that price tag ended up killing its momentum in 2006, as it had almost 60% less units than the final 2 quarters of 2005. According to Slasher Gaming, Nintendo decided to make a 3DS handle as it's possible to potential buyers, launching plenty of great titles and eventually releasing new versions of the system. This was a good move for Nintendo, and it enjoyed success with the handheld console, selling around 74 million units. Sony, on the other hand, seemed to ignore the Vita once it realized the console wasn't garnering the number of sales it had originally hoped for. According to ING.com, the biggest sellers, top 5 best-selling consoles were PlayStation 2, Sony selling 159 million, Nintendo DS selling 154 million, Nintendo Switch selling 122.5 million. Nintendo selling Game Boy Color selling 118.69 million. And lastly, PS4 Sony selling 11.72 million. Although Sony made the list of years, Nintendo was still outselling it. Now let's focus more on Microsoft. According to Microsoft.com, Call of Duty also became one of the biggest games in 2023 with the corporation of Activision Blizzard, a Microsoft company. More than that being said, Call of Duty is neither a Sony or Microsoft game. It is a co-op with the company. But that looks into more what games Microsoft has owned and made a big effect on the gaming community. Halo was one of Xbox's biggest games out ever, introducing one of the biggest multiplayer games in the Microsoft community. The game proved that Microsoft was not just some latecomer trying to use an abundance of cash to muscle out of the dominant PlayStation. And it will be Halo's sequels that help make Microsoft a bigger force throughout Xbox Live. Though its role as Xbox exclusive, Halo helped lay the foundation of 2 decades of what gaming will become. The online multiplayer of Microsoft console was going to be a big deal if they could make it happen. The hype around games multiplayer was favorable. Given the first entry already had highly popular multiplayer local games, meant that this online and expanding multiplayer was about as hyped as any other game had ever hoped to be. When the game finally released, the single player component had mostly positive but still mixed reaction. Although Sony finally had a fantasy, it wasn't as big as Halo. What games does Sony have that are really owned, that engage with the multiplayer structure?
Games ready?
Playing time?
Yes, 1 minute.
1 minute.
Nintendo doesn't have one.
1 minute playing time on the clock.
I like the Microsoft versus Sony. It definitely
30 seconds.
has.
15 seconds. That's time. All right, affirmative, this is your opportunity to cross-examine the negatives argument. Are you ready?
Yep.
Three minutes on the clock. Begin.
Alright, so during my opponent's cross, she said that Nintendo let go of Sony, but what actually happened, according to the PlayStation historians, PlayStation started wanting to add add-ons onto the N64 and the Super NES, and Nintendo did not like that. They wanted to keep their console original and have everything, and as Sony was trying to make the things better to help sales, Nintendo let go of Sony, saying, I don't like what you're doing, and let them go. You said that the DS was selling a lot more, but they were still using cartridges, while the PSP was using discs from such with the size of the GameCube, and that what makes the DS less superior because the cartridges do not hold as much memory, and they don't load as fast as the PSP discs do. Whereas the GameCube was still using discs and it had an entire console, and the PSP was still high powered and was handheld. You were talking a lot about sales and how Activision and Blizzard were with Microsoft, and that's true, but more of the sales of Activision have gone through PlayStation, and one of the bigger games PlayStation has is again GTA, that has sold almost 52 million copies towards PlayStation throughout PS2 and throughout the PS5.
Sounds really like the same generations of
Okay.
console.
But there's also like 6
So here, that speech that you just did, that's supposed to be where you attack her argument, not where you defend your argument against her attacks.
Oh.
So what we'll do is we'll just flip that, and because you go next again, and this is supposed to be where you get your rebuttal. since you just did your rebuttal, we'll use this time for you to attack her argument.
And so once he attacks, I have to defend.
Correct. Once he attacks you, you come back and you get to defend your argument against his attack.
Okay.
So, do you want to use planning time to come up with the attack? Okay, how much?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Two minutes on the clock.
Nice.
One minute. Thirty seconds. Fifteen seconds. That's time. So we're at 3 minutes on the clock, because this is gonna be where you are attacking Cianna's argument. Ready?
Yep.
3 minutes on the clock.
My opponent talked a lot about Microsoft, but not a lot about Nintendo. Nintendo has done not a lot of good things, such as, let's talk about one of the bigger consoles, newer, the Wii U. How that was, I had one who was super cool, but it was not very comfortable. It was super slow, and it broke in like 2 years. Now, the Wii was cool, but what was the point of having a giant stick in your hand that you could throw around? Microsoft has done a lot of good things, but as I was looking, they have also been introduced into a lot of illegal protesting, and it talks about having fund U.S. immigrants that come in, which is very key. Like, why? But Nintendo has come out with not good games. Who wants to play Mario 6 different times? Like, I just don't see the fun in it. Like, once you play one Mario game, it's not, you're like, okay, whatever. Whereas Microsoft has come up with different games, but it's all kind of the same. So Nintendo and Microsoft don't have a lot of unique capabilities.
All right, Cianna, this is your rebuttal. So this is where you defend your argument against his attacks. This is also your last opportunity to attack any arguments that he has brought up. This is your last chance to speak. So make it count. Got it? You're also out of planning time zone. Six minutes on the clock, you ready? Begin.
My opponent mentioned that I didn't say much about Nintendo, but I mentioned more about Nintendo than Microsoft. And he said that Nintendo has did a lot of bad things towards Sony. Well, according to the contract with Sony, Sony could make and sell CD-ROM games without buying them from Nintendo, but Nintendo wanted a monopoly of manufacturing games for its hardware. Without Microsoft, not every video game series that sold more companies than GTA is older and has been based down many generations through Sony. But in this case, Call of Duty is nearly 6 years younger, but has gone on to sell almost 30 million more copies than GTA. According to Slasher Gamer, Sony has had more trouble making meaningful headway in its own library of games. The Vita's launch library was very limited, and how he said how Microsoft and Nintendo don't have many variety of games. Once they launched the PS Vita, it was very limited, with a couple of interesting or noteworthy games per genre. Sony realized some of its true franchise in pocketable form, but even they didn't seem interested in putting forth more effort after the launch. In fact, Sony's engineers admitted that most developers viewed the Vita as a secondary priority to PS4, making this to divert significant resources to the platform.
Okay, Landon, this is your last rebuttal. So this is where you get to respond to any attacks that you just suffered from Cianna, and also where you wrap up your debate. In this speech, you're not allowed to bring up any new information because Cianna doesn't get a chance to speak again. Okay?
Okay.
Do you want any planning time? You have 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
2 minutes. 2 minutes planning time on the clock. One minute. Thirty seconds. Fifteen seconds. time. Ready? 3 minutes on the clock. Begin.
Alright, she said that my opponent stated that that I missed, that she talked about Nintendo a lot and she talked more about Microsoft, which is true, but she said more about the Nintendo and how they use more of the consoles and how Microsoft has better sales and Call of Duty, but through the Activision, Sony and Microsoft have made similar sales with all their games, and it's very close. Which means they've both made the exact same amount of money. Nintendo really just focuses on more of their Mario and makes it branch off into different things. And this draws Nintendo back because they only have that one thing that they really just focus on, while Sony and Microsoft all focus on all these different things. And that brings Nintendo back, and which is why I didn't focus much on Nintendo, because they only have so many things to offer. I focused more on GTA because that's more of the popular ones, but throughout my speech I talked about God of War and Spider-Man, and that also really highlights Sony's thing, and those are only exclusive to Sony, and that what makes people want to go towards Sony, because they have these different options that they can play through.
Judges, do you have any questions for your debaters that you need clarification on? Remember, you are not allowed to give your opinion on anything. You're only allowed to ask questions that you need clarification on.
What is your contingency?
That Microsoft and Nintendo gaming systems have a powerful effect on the gaming community more than Sony's do.
Have a powerful effect on
The gaming community
gaming community?
more than Sony.
But a more powerful impact on the gaming community than some.
Anyone else?
Landon, same question, what was your contention again?
It was how, I have to pull back up. It was Mr. Logan, I shared it through Google Classroom.
Yep, you did.
Okay.
Are you looking for what the contention was?
Yeah, because
Your contention was Sony is more driven and determined than Microsoft and Nintendo, and that's what makes them better. Anybody else?